for years, I've really struggled to find a great lead sound. It was a constant source of aggravation because I just couldn't get what I wanted because I use so much high gain in my rhythm sound. You can't just throw another high gain thing as much as you can in the studio and really kind of dial in a sound because of the universal application that you need. And in most guitar players' cases, up until recently, it was like, well, you'd have the one pedal that would be your lead pedal. So for years, I was using that kind of setup, and I wanted to smash everything in half because I could never get what I wanted for all the songs that I was playing lead on. And I'm a recent convert to this new Line 6 HX effects thing. I'd used Line 6 stuff in the past. It was certainly impressive, but I found it really didn't apply to what I would call the upper echelon professional level of where you've got maximum pressure to deliver on every stage around the world. I felt it was a great tool for musicians getting started because it gave them this great palette. But for me, I just didn't feel the sonics were there. So when they sent this thing recently to me, I was honestly very skeptical because I've been down this road before with these multi-effects where they're supposed to have 100 pedals in a box. Absolutely blown away by this unit. I've gotten rid of all my vintage pedals and all my effects now are in this box. I have everything I need for, essentially, 14 years of my musical life where I was using a lot of electroharmonics and stuff like that. I love all that stuff, but it's impossible to have 15 pedals in a live setup. And as a singer who plays guitar or a guitar player who sings, I don't have the luxury to run around and stomp around like a bolero dancer, So the ability to chain effects, the ability to decide what order they go in, have customized settings for every song, it's amazing. And obviously they must have worked something out because there's emulations of a lot of famous pedals in here. So they are really paying tribute to those pedals. They haven't created anything new as much as they found a modern application of how to take the vintage sound forward into the modern world. And it's fantastic. So I'm using it basically as an effect unit, but I'm very, very impressed with the sonics. So in the case of, let's say, let's call it Gish era, where I really only had kind of one linear preamp, not as fuzz-driven as, say, later eras. So you would have like a very good cranked amp sound, like an 80s Marshall. And this would be kind of a... So it's more like a jacked sound as opposed to like something that would be more square wavy. Like, let's see. So, say for Cherub Rock, which is super high gain, and for example, on the Siamese Dream album is tape flange. So trying to get essentially an in-studio effect live is impossible. But by using kind of the univibe effect in here and more like a square wave fuzz, I can approximate it. So I'll give you the general guitar sound. Now that's basically like a Wild Pony sound, but that's the closest I can get to that sort of, it's like riding a storm, and you have to play a certain way. There's a lot of noise involved. It's not clean. As far as on the road, I'm a firm believer in not using anything for rhythm sound. So I don't use any boosters. I don't use any compression. I'll give you a perfect example. I was working in the studio with Tony Iommi from Black Sabbath, who's my hero, and I'm watching Tony play from 5 feet away, and it sounds unbelievable. And I look through this little window to look at his amp, and his gain is set on 6. And there's no special pedal, there's nothing. He's literally running from the guitar straight in the head. And that's when you learn, it's in the hands. And the more that you put to artificially create the sound of excitement will take away from your ability to learn how to generate excitement from your own playing. And so, like when I was playing like the riff from Shiva or something, I mean, that's pretty much the sound that I had, and And I had to learn how to play in a way that would get the excitement that way because I didn't have enough gain. When I got more gain, maybe my playing wasn't as exciting because I didn't have to play as exciting from a physical point of view. In the old days, not too far distant old days, musicians didn't have a lot of things to choose from. Now we have a ton of things to choose from, and I would argue that there's enough gain in modern amps that you don't need a lot of stuff before it outside of playing leads. Leads is a different issue because obviously that gets into, you know, you want to be able to have the guitar. In my case, I want the guitar to sort of explode as I play it, and I want a lot of square wave stuff going on so that the guitar becomes kind of like a crazy storm and interactive. But obviously it doesn't apply for rhythm. So I have, through Salvation mods, I have 8 different amp choices. They're all modeled on amps that I use in the studio, so that allows me to bring my studio sonic palette onto the road, which for years was always a thing that was impossible because you'd have to sort of choose one amp, one sound. So for example, I have a clean late 60s Selmer. But it's not just having a clean sound, it's the way that the amp reacts. So I have another clean sound, which is a different Selmer amp. And so I have a different gain structure, be more something for tonight. So just in those 2 amps, those are 2 completely different amps that react to 2 totally different gain structures. So because of the diversity of our band's music, it allows me to play not just those songs, but play them very specifically to the way I would have written them and approach them from a studio perspective. Recently, I bought a mid-70s, I think it's called Music City, which is basically an updated version of the original Tony Iommi Black Sabbath Laney amp. I have that amp too, but I'm using that for a different purpose than a high gain situation. So this is more like, if you know, like Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath era, Black Sabbath, this amp would be an emulation of that. So I'm using that actually on Solara because this is the amp that I used in the studio. And this is actually the guitar I use. So for example, I can get that almost, it's not the same because it's not the head, but probably 90+% as accurate as it was being in the studio. So you have the exact sound. And so from a guitar player point of view, as we all know, different amps make us play different ways. So instead of having one homogenized sound, I can have the exact sound that I want. And then, of course, it makes me play that way again. Or like a Tris does it. People would know it's more like a mid-80s Marshall gain profile. So it makes me play exactly that same way, where a lot of other tours I was using a lot of high gain and I would play the riff, but it wouldn't sound the same to me, so I would play it different. And maybe that's why people would complain it doesn't sound the same. And then the only other thing to note on this is setup would be I have more of a 90s era high gain Marshall for like the bigger kind of Bullet with Butterfly Wings type songs. Like. And again, this may not sound like a lot of variance. I mean, distortion is distortion, but distortion characteristics in terms of how they apply against another guitar, or in their case, 2 other guitars, it makes all the difference in the world. And I'm sure anybody who's a guitar player knows what I'm talking about. You have a sound, you like the sound, you get in a band situation, the minute you start playing, the distortion goes to shit and you can't hear yourself. And that's really the difference. It's like, it's what works within the soup of a band. And so these are tones that all work within these high gain settings, because a lot of Pumpkin's music is super high gain. And so it's like a chef or something. You're trying to delineate different tones and different textures for different applications.